Prospective Green Party candidate Cornel West is calling out Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders for refusing to back him. Let's watch what he had to say.
You've got a progressive slice in the Democratic Party. I was with Brother Bernie, as my dear sister knows, twice. They treated him badly. They treated him unjustly. They rigged the whole thing. You had Hillary Clinton and the others were going to ensure that he did not win no matter what. So at the core of the Democratic Party is a rot. And that rottenness is corporate greed. So when I hear AOC, I say, okay, she's part of that progressive small slice of the Democratic Party, but she's giving in to the perceptions of the corporate wing of that party. And the corporate wing says over and over again, all we have is two parties. It's freaking frack. It's Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
And I think we have a little bit more of that interview. Let's play it for you now.
I love the brother, and you know, even in love, people have deep disagreements about these things. But I think, again, he's fearful of the neo-fascism of Trump, and he just sees that somehow Biden. See, part of the problem is that people look at Biden, they don't really want to tell the full truth. If you say, okay, the Trump doesn't even have a bar, he's below the ground. Because he just gangster dead up. It's always said he was a gangster, so it's not a surprise. You know what I mean? And he's been obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. And it looks like he might get caught, but we don't know. We don't know. Most black folk would have done 1/100th of what he did.
Oh, come on.
And end up in jail. I got my dear brother Mark Ridley Thomas in L.A., the most powerful black politician who has been convicted for nothing under Biden's Justice Department.
So that second clip, he was talking about Bernie Sanders being unwilling to tell the truth about Joe Biden and what he represents to the interests of average Americans. Now, this was a fascinating interview. He was on the Breakfast Club, which is one of the most listened to urban media stations, a huge platform. It was very warmly received, which I'm sure rankles a lot of Democrats who are in particular concerned about what will happen with the black vote with someone like Cornel West running in the general election. But what do you make of this willingness to go after people or criticize people like AOC and Bernie Sanders pointedly for seemingly abandoning their policy principles and early on endorsing Biden, a candidate about whom AOC once said in any normal country would not even be in the same party?
Yeah, it certainly seems like things have shifted a little bit for AOC in particular. My perception is that true, actual progressive, actual leftists have grown very frustrated with her, very tired with her for not fighting the good fight on literally anything, and seeming to feel very comfortable and very at home with the moderate faction of the Democratic Party, with the mainstream media, with the attention she gets. I don't know if it was because she got, so attacked by conservative and right-wing media. There was a time period where like every other story on a conservative website was about AOC. Some of them fair criticism or criticism that I too would have. You probably wouldn't have, but I would have. Some of it, very silly, like, oh, she was in a dance video once or something. Perhaps it made her seek the familiarity and the friendship of the major mainstream media apparatus or something like that. I don't know. For whatever reason, she doesn't want to be a scrappy outsider fighting for her leftist views, and you can feel that frustration from Cornel West.
Well, it's interesting. So Dan Marins at HuffPo just actually wrote this lengthy deep dive into what's been going on with Justice Democrats, which is the organization that mounted her campaign, recruited progressive candidates to run in the wake of Bernie's 2016 movement. AOC, of course, was the most successful member of that effort. Now, they'd recently just laid off 9 of 20 staffers. They've been having trouble fundraising. And there's some questions in this article about what the organization is doing that might have led to this result. So one point that Marins makes, if I recall correctly, is that she is one of the best fundraisers in the Democratic Party. She kills it. I don't think that anybody in the House beats her, maybe Nancy Pelosi. But she spent a lot of that money on her own race. One might think that she needed to do that to stay into office, but when the votes were all in, she won by an incredibly comfortable margin. And, there's some question as to whether or not she really needed to spend all of those millions of dollars of resources on staying in office when this organization that she perhaps would not exist without and which is now flailing desperately needs her fundraising support. She does do co-fundraising with them and tries to help them out in that way. But some progressives look at that and say, you have in the past, she no longer does this, but you have in the past given money to Blue Dog Democrats through your fundraising for the Democratic Party. Here's Justice Democrats not able to keep their head afloat. What are you even doing here? Are your allegiances more to the Democratic Party than they are to the progressive movement? Moreover, Justice Democrats itself as an organization is getting a lot of flack for saying your unwillingness to be critical of any of these squad members ever or pressure them to be more adversarial to the Democratic Party the way the Freedom Caucus is doing, even when that was the explicit purpose of your organization, something that founders, Justice Democrat co-founders, Cenk Uygur and Kyle Kalinske both say, we founded you to be adversaries of the Democratic Party. Your failure to do so is exactly why you can't raise money anymore. Because progressives who are giving you their last $7 an hour of their pay, people who are working class, did not want you to get in there and pat Hakeem Jeffries on the back, even though he has spent his entire career, or the most recent years of his career, trying to unseat you guys from office. If you're more cozy with him, as the Freedom Caucus is fighting their establishment wing, if you're throwing your arms around Hakeem Jeffries, why on earth should I give you my last $27 when you made it obvious that you're not going to fight for me? And so I think that Cornel West, his presence in this race is really giving that disaffected corner of the left a place to latch onto. And it's also giving, I think, some black voters who might not have identified as leftists or even as a part of the Bernie movement, generally speaking, a place to say, oh, here's someone who's willing to articulate a reason to vote that's affirmative for the black community instead of patronizingly saying, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, while ignoring these fundamental promises that Joe Biden made to the black community, from the $2,000 checks to the canceling student debt for HBCU graduates in particular, to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and on down the line. So I think him giving interviews like this, it's a real panic moment for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I noticed that it seems like a similar thing is happening to the leftist political movement in this country as happened. I've gone through this with the libertarian movement. There was a broad sort of idea that even had eventually pervaded the mainstream media that libertarianism was having a political moment in 2000, from the 2010 to 2014 period, I would say. The Tea Party movement swept into Congress a lot of Republicans who paid a lot of lip service, at least, to limited government, to the idea of reducing government regulation and taxes and all those kinds of things. Rand Paul was at his. He's also gotten. He's very ascendant now, too, because of his fighting with Fauci and all the COVID stuff. But there was a moment where there was polling showing he being the preferred person of these Tea Party libertarian views within the Republican Party, that he might be the front runner for the nomination. And there was a New York Times story about how well libertarians were doing. Republicans thought that by going all in on, limiting government and then kind of giving up some of the culture war stuff like abortion and gay marriage, that would be, and immigration, because a lot of libertarians, it's kind of split sometimes. A lot of libertarians, if you're being principled, you want more immigration. You want less restriction, government restriction on labor. Then Donald Trump came along and kind of just destroyed that consensus and was very successful, not by doing completely 100% the opposite of libertarianism, because honestly his foreign policy ideas are very influenced by Ron and Rand Paul and by the libertarian wing. But a lot of the rest of it is a mixed bag. And now it's just all about Trump, and it's harder to get my ideas back into the discourse on the Republican Party. Yeah, I wonder if a similar thing's happening.
I think that many people predicted, myself included, at great personal risk to myself professionally, that Joe Biden was a danger to the left and to left movements, and that the left should be critical about the idea of falling in line and voting for him in 2020. I very publicly and famously declined to do so. And it was largely because of this reason, because we see, and you hear people making this argument in Daniel Maren's piece in HuffPo, that, Biden's pretty good at X, Y, and Z. He spent more money on climate than anyone else has, so it doesn't matter if he spent too little to actually prevent a climate apocalypse. Well, Trump is bad on these things, so we shouldn't pay attention to the fact that Joe Biden wrote the crime bill. Well, he did half child poverty. We're not going to look too closely at the fact that they designed the policy to sunset, so it wouldn't be a long-term thing after the pandemic. Well, he tried with student debt, ignoring the fact that by many people's understanding that he had legal authority to simply use executive orders to cancel all the student debt on day one, the same way that Donald Trump used the legal authority to put the moratorium in the first place, and that it's Joe Biden who's going to be the one who's going to lift the moratorium that Donald Trump put into effect and saved 44 million student debtors so much money over the last 3 years. So Biden's plausible deniability, his seeming like an okay guy, has completely neutered the left movement. You don't hear anybody talking about Medicare for all anymore because Joe Biden said it's completely off the table. I would veto it even if it passed Congress. And how in that kind of a space can you live as an AOC candidate? How can you be a Democrat who walked around next to Bernie Sanders saying there was this moral call to say that, and in the richest country in the world, we cannot have 68,000 people dying just because they were too poor for health care, and then back someone like Joe Biden who uses the tragic death of his own son in a commercial to justify why he does not support universal health care, point of service free health care for Americans who are not rich enough to get the services that his own son got.
And then he won.
And then he won. And so the left's still trying to, those people on the left, like AOC, who are still trying to keep one foot within the Democratic Party, they're ultimately useful idiots to many on the left, serving the purpose of validating a party that fundamentally is antagonistic to the interests of the movements that put them there in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that's what Cornel West is running on. Certainly, I think a candidate, you would probably agree, is exciting for the left.
Yes,
is really a genuine
absolutely.
leftist. So we'll have to see how well he does, and if that does end up siphoning, deservedly perhaps, voters from Joe Biden.
Absolutely.
Well, that does it for us for this week on Rising. Tomorrow, Jessica Burbank and Amber Athey will be back for Rising Fridays. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for tuning in.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while you're on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Very special young lady has a birthday coming up next week, I think.
Very special lady. I don't know about the young part. See you next week.
See ya.